Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes Juneteenth and the Hanged Man. So we're going to start out this piece by taking a look at some information you can find for yourself on Wikipedia about what the tradition of Juneteenth is all about here in what we commonly call America. So it's commonly celebrated on what we commonly call June 19th, and this is known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, or Liberation Day. So the story behind it that we're given is that on what we commonly call June 19th of 1865, General Order Number 3 was read publicly in Texas. This was essentially letting the Texas people know that the freeing of slaves had occurred even though it was 2 years earlier through the Emancipation Proclamation, as we're taught, that supposedly freed the slaves. Because Texas was the most remote of slave states, they were slow to implement the ending of slavery. So when we look at a map from the Civil War days, we can see the northern free states and the southern slave states. And remember, as we talked a bit in the last piece, the Confederacy was that collection of sovereign southern states. And the memorials of the Confederacy tied in with this Civil War era and slavery story that we're given are those particular memorials that were removed during these protests and riots currently over the George Floyd murder on video narrative we've been decoding in the last several videos we've put up. So in this whole developing narrative, another revolting development that we've been given in this whole murder on video, then protests and riots and building racial tension, all appearing to be an intentional provocation of perhaps another race war by the Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society. And over the past week, during these protests and riots, the media has now reported a total of 4 different so-called black men found hanging from trees during this time. Now, in the story that we're given, these hangings are correlated with suicides. But let's not just skip over the obvious association of lynching that's commonly made in what we commonly call the American mind, right? With all of this so-called American history and the Civil War story and slavery of so-called black people that were given with all of this, right? Even through the stories that we're given now that they're suicides, where these so-called black men are hanging from trees and not lynchings, it's not a coincidence that the association is intended. And nor is it a coincidence that these stories are coming out during this specific time, where the unfolding of the George Floyd murder on video by so-called white police officers kicked off all these riots and protests, supposedly, but definitely real racial tension being built in real people has become the result. To decode what's really going on, we're going again to use the real all-seeing eye or the real oracle to help us out and see the truth from what the sky story shows us, and how the Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society are using that knowledge, hiding it from us, and performing their wicked rituals on the world stage for us all to play the fool in continually. So we're queuing up summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, what we commonly call the date of June 21st at 2020 at high noon. And this picture you may be familiar with if you've watched our 4 videos, The Story of Jesus starring Orion and the Sun. We're going to go over some of that information you can find there again quickly. So just to orient everybody, once again, that special place in the sky that we're calling the real all-seeing eye or the real oracle, where all the action is occurring in all these ancient stories up to the modern day, we're looking at the arc of the ecliptic, that red line that's going horizontally in the middle of the image. And the reason that this is a special place in the sky is when you face due south, you can find all of the known zodiac constellations, all of the known planets, the sun and the moon, all rise in the east and set in the west in this very narrow band in the sky. Where this crosses the green line, that vertical line going down the image, the north-south meridian line, that is that very special crossing point that shows up over and over again in so many myths, legends, tales, and even religious stories and scripts. Now, what we're going to look at here, again, is the location of the constellation of Orion. And as you're queuing things up and looking at the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice, you can find Orion right at that very special cross of the arc of the ecliptic and the north-south meridian line. And on the summer solstice, you can find Orion's bow is just crossing that special crossing point. And then if you look at his upstretched hand toward the arc of the ecliptic, you're going to find the sun and the moon both. That dark spot next to the sun is the moon, also in Orion's hand. And we saw in the piece with the story of Jesus starring Orion and the sun, that this particular alignment, when the sun is at its zenith, or the highest point that it reaches all day, and on this day, all year. So in other words, the sun's zenith is the highest point in the sky that the sun reaches all day, and that is high noon. The summer solstice is when the sun reaches its highest point of the day at high noon, but is also found to be highest in the sky that you will find the sun climbing all year. This marks the start of the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's also the longest day and the shortest night of the year. So now that we're oriented, let's go forward to the sky story picture to the 1st of July, as it's commonly called, at noon. And note this time that Orion has moved more to the west of that special crossing point of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic. Yet note that the sun is still found to be on the east side of that special crossing point of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic. So remember, when we go forward to what we commonly call July 4th of 2020, or what we celebrate here in what we commonly call America as Independence Day, we see the real reason why it's actually called Independence Day. Because you can see that the sun, staying in its location on the east side of the cross of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic, and the constellation of Orion, found to be on the west side of that special crossing point, these two celestial bodies are now fully separated from each other, where the sun will continue along its journey to be found on the east side of the cross of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic this time of year, but Orion will no longer be coupled with the sun's journey and will continue on its own, or independently from the sun, as it continues to travel westward. These independent journeys we have discovered of the sun and Orion this time of year is the real reason why the holy day, or the holiday of Independence Day, is celebrated here in what we commonly call America. So we're taking a look at this because remember that the all-seeing eye, or the real oracle, as we've been calling it, sees all over the earth all at the same time. So that means that just because you don't see the constellations that dip below the Earth's horizon from our Northern Hemisphere viewers' perspective, that doesn't mean those constellations in reality aren't still there. They are. They're visible to those who are viewing the stars from the Southern Hemisphere. But remember, this is a mirrored or coupled kind of concept that you can think of it as, because while we're in the Northern Hemisphere experiencing a night sky at midnight, they, in the Southern Hemisphere, or down under, are experiencing the daytime because it's high noon. So what we're looking at here, obviously, is high noon. Consider that in the Southern Hemisphere, at this same time, it's midnight there. So this period that we're decoding, where you're always going to find what you can think of as its mirror or reflection or opposite, we're going to now look at, in this case, since we've looked at the daytime summer solstice through Independence Day, we're going to now turn our perspective around and look at this, what is going to be this newly declared holiday or holy day here in what we commonly call America, known as Juneteenth. Let's take a look at why. So we're going to start out with a screenshot queued up to the beginning of May this year. So what we commonly call May 1st of 2020 to start with. Just to remind everyone that in the last several segments, starting with our video, The Oracle Decodes Adam and Eve, Memorial Day and 9/11, going through the George Floyd narrative, the protests that and the riots, we've been tracking through those pieces the constellation of Gemini, or the twins, and its journey through the sky story as it descends into the western horizon of the Earth and dies at midnight at Memorial Day. Now, because Gemini will no longer be seen at midnight above the Earth's horizon any longer, beginning from Memorial Day and following for the week after, you can see how a description of the twins descending into the realm of death, or the underground, or buried in a grave, would make sense if you were trying to construct a story that was easy to remember about what you were watching occur in these particular stars. Especially if it was in a time before we had writing as a people. But what I want to point out here in this screenshot is how many little tricks are being used to make sure that it's very difficult to decode what's actually going on. Little things to keep these things hidden or occulted from our view. Look at where this tree is placed in this stellarium screenshot. It's not a coincidence or a mistake, the way I see it, that there happens to be a tree exactly at the spot where everything happens to be along the arc of the ecliptic, descending into the western horizon of the Earth. All right, but the reason in showing this is more so that you can get a look at the all-seeing eye, or the oracle, that's above the Earth's horizon in this image, because the next image I'm going to show you is going to be the other side of it, or the underworld, or the underground side of it from this perspective. So this is a screenshot we've queued up in Stellarium for now. We're getting close to the holiday that we're decoding here, Juneteenth. So the day before, what we commonly call June 18th of 2020, it's the day before Juneteenth at midnight. What you're looking at is everything that's within the real all-seeing eye, or the oracle, but below the Earth's horizon from the Northern Hemisphere viewer's perspective. So in other words, it's a look down under, or a look into the underworld. Now let's take a look at where the constellation of Orion is in this picture, with his bow just touching the cross of this special crossing point, right? The north-south meridian line and the ecliptic, with the sun in his outstretched hand. Remember, this is the all-seeing eye, so it sees all over the Earth all at the same time. So it's the underworld at midnight, right, from our perspective in the north. But Orion is holding the sun in his hand at high noon, down under, in the southern hemisphere. And from our perspective, Orion would be hanging upside down, right? Now, if you've ever looked into tarot cards, you might recognize the 12th card of the tarot right away, the Hanged Man. When you look at the constellation of Orion hanging upside down, from our perspective in the northern hemisphere anyway, Orion's hanging by his foot, right, on the cross or the tree of the north-south meridian line and the ecliptic, with the sun over his head at high noon. And I think you can see for yourself what the Hanged Man in the tarot is actually encoding. But just to make sure, the Hanged Man, it's card number 12. Just like Orion at high noon around the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, but at that same time, it's midnight in the southern hemisphere, and Orion's upside down, because it's noon in the southern hemisphere where it's midnight here in the north. 12 is the number of the card. That's why clocks, both at midnight and noon, read 12. So numbering the Hanged Man card number 12 shows us further how to decode it properly as we have. And in doing so now, you can also make the connection pretty easily as to what the Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society story about these so-called black men hanging from trees during this intentionally provocative building of racial tension is really all about. This is the kind of wicked rituals that this very ancient cult we call the Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society performs on the world stage. This is what they create out of the beautiful knowledge, comprehension, and wisdom that was meant for all of us. This is how they keep it hidden, and this is how they corrupted it, and us in the process by being deceived and to keep falling for this over and over again, or to be hung up by it. So notice that on what we commonly call June 18th of 2020, as we're looking at Orion the day before Juneteenth, the position of his bow is just touching the north-south meridian line. But if we go forward one more day to Juneteenth, you see that Orion's bow has now just crossed over that very important crossing point, signaling his return or coming back up in the east part of his journey again, where he'll rise above the Earth's horizon once again. You can see why a story about being freed from the chains of slavery or freedom for those in the dark realms. This could go back all the way to ancient stories like freeing slaves in dark places like caves. And even to ritualize the story, giving darker-skinned people here on Earth the enslaved and oppressed role to play on the world stage. Juneteenth is really the underground or mirror opposite holy day or holiday to the American Independence Day. Juneteenth is representing the dark or the night Independence Day at midnight. Independence Day representing the light or the daytime Independence Day at high noon. Same geographical location, known as America, same time of year. The summer solstice time of year, and in reality, those are the stories, in this case, that were meant to keep track, once again, of Orion and the sun as a way to keep time in our modern era, or a calendar, or in this case, the way to create more of their history. The events or occurrences that are recorded on their timeline too. Something else I want to show you is a screenshot from Stellarium of, we're going to cue it up for what we commonly call June 3rd of 2020. And even though you can check out the constellation of Cancer labeled there, you can't actually see the constellation and what it looks like descending into the western horizon of the Earth with that tree in the way, occulting our view again, right? So what we got to do is look back at when we can see the shape of Cancer, this constellation. So we're going to queue up a screenshot in Stellarium for the beginning of May again at midnight, so you can take a look at how the constellation of Cancer is shaped, like an X, right? Just like the Confederate battle flag, an X and stars, of course, so you don't miss the real message. An X marks the spot for buried treasure, doesn't it? Or you can think of it as marking the underground, down under, down there, the crossing to the south. That's why in Stellarium, that tree just happens to be there. No coincidence. It might be, if it wasn't, too obvious to the viewer if the viewer was able to see the X in the sky story that shows you exactly where and when to dig for the real buried treasure of some of this deepest and hidden knowledge. So as we end things in this piece, let's dig a bit deeper into this old Civil War and slavery in America, at least the history or story that we've been given, in connection with Juneteenth and the unfolding, what looks like attempted to be provoked Civil War version 2 here in what we commonly call America, and realize how old this liar, liar, pants on fire, secret drama society cult really is, and how long their divisive lies have actually been going on. We're back to a screenshot of Juneteenth this year at midnight from the Northern Hemisphere viewer's perspective, and we're going to look at this all-seeing eye, or this real oracle, this time in quadrants. So taking the north-south meridian line as the vertical part of the cross, and the horizon of the earth as the vertical part of the cross, as the horizontal part of the cross, you can see that what it looks like here, where the quadrants 1 and 2 are above the horizon of the earth, and the quadrants 3 and 4 are underground. Let's lay a map of the Underground Railroad, as it's known, a pathway or networked system to free so-called black slaves through, back during the slavery and Civil War era. Now you know the real reason why this narrative and the name of the Underground Railroad and the slavery South was given, and why slaves were kept in the South in this narrative to begin with, because that is the underground, the South in the sky story picture. And looking at the map of free states and slave states, and a picture of the sky story along with it of Juneteenth, now we can put it all together. The reason Texas was the last state to supposedly get the message about slaves being free is because geographically, when you take a look at it, Texas, as it's known on Earth, was the slave southern state, but last to be freed because it's the most eastward. Freed from the underworld, right, is Orion as he moves eastward and will eventually appear to rise again over the Earth's horizon in the east in the beginning of spring, where the living are free to be and grow again. And finally, tie this back into the time of the viral panic, because there's no coincidence that actually on Juneteenth, this news story was run by CBS that shows an all-time high, rising cases of this coronavirus. And take a look. Now you know why, as you can properly decode things here, why these viral cases are on the rise at this particular time in these particular states. Believing in and participating in the liar, liar, pants on fire, secret drama society rituals, even unknowingly, is the real mental slavery that we must all break the chains of, no matter what beautiful color the Creator made your skin. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're here to end, this mental slavery for all of us. We'll end things here, and until next time, be well.